I learned that a life can end without anyone dying, with nothing more than a white paper taped to a glass door before sunrise. At 5:40 in the morning, my flower shop stood on the corner of West 18th Street and 9th Avenue, quiet under a thin veil of fog, its windows beaded with cold March mist, its faded green awning trembling in the wind like it already knew goodbye was coming. I had opened that door every morning for 9 years, first beside my mother, then alone after cancer took her hands from mine and left me with her keys, her debts, and the smell of roses soaked into the floorboards. Bennett Bloom's was not fancy. It did not have marble counters or perfect lighting or the kind of displays rich brides posted online. It had creaky shelves, stubborn pipes, a bell above the door that rang too loudly, and a back room where my mother used to hum while trimming stems at 6 in the morning. It was the only place in New York that still remembered her voice. That morning there was a notice taped across the lock. Final demand. 24 hours. $48,000 in outstanding balance, penalties, and legal fees. Failure to pay would result in immediate seizure of commercial property and residential unit above. I read it once, then again, then a third time because panic makes the mind stupid, and some part of me thought the number might change if I stared hard enough. It did not. My fingers shook as I peeled the paper from the glass. The tape came off in strips, loud in the empty street. A delivery truck groaned somewhere 2 blocks away. A cyclist passed with a coffee in one hand. The city kept moving because that was what cities did. They let your world collapse quietly between someone else's breakfast and a traffic light turning green. I folded the notice into my coat pocket and unlocked the door. The bell rang. For 1 second I heard my mother's voice behind me, gentle and tired, saying, "Ava, flowers first, fear later." So I did what I had always done. I turned on the lights. I filled the buckets. I trimmed the thorns from white roses and set lavender near the window because it made the shop smell like summer, even when the radiators clanked. And the sidewalk outside looked like dirty ice. My name was Ava Bennett, 27 years old. White skin too pale from long mornings and longer nights. Brown hair that never stayed pinned. Hazel eyes my mother said looked honest, even when I tried to hide things. I had $73 in my checking account, 2 overdue utility bills, and a landlord who had stopped pretending this was business instead of hunger wearing a suit. Around my neck, under my sweater, rested a small silver medal on a chain so old the edges had gone smooth. My mother had given it to me the night we left Brooklyn when I was 12. She had pressed it into my palm with shaking fingers and said, "Never take this off. Never tell anyone where it came from. Never say the name Moretti to strangers." For 15 years I obeyed her. I built a quiet life out of silence. I smiled at customers. I delivered funeral lilies. I made wedding bouquets for women who cried happy tears over ribbons I could barely afford to buy. I pretended the past was buried deep enough to stop breathing. Then at 6:15 the shop phone rang. I almost ignored it. I was too busy staring at the notice folded in my pocket like a death sentence. But instinct answered before despair could stop me. "Bennett Bloom's, this is Ava." A woman with a polished voice said she was calling from the Langford Hotel. Their charity auction needed an emergency floral replacement by noon. White roses, Italian ruscus, silver ribbon. Cash bonus for same-day delivery. I closed my eyes. It was not enough to save the shop. Not even close. But it was enough to buy time, maybe a few more days, maybe one more phone call, maybe one more chance to find a miracle in a city that charged interest on hope. I said yes before she finished speaking. By sunrise, I had 24 hours to save the only place that still remembered my mother, and by noon, I would walk into a room full of people who could destroy me with a signature, carrying white roses and the one secret I had spent 15 years trying to keep hidden. By 8:30, the shop looked more alive than I felt. White roses stood in tall buckets along the front counter, their petals tight and pale, each one cool beneath my fingertips as I stripped leaves, trimmed stems, and wrapped them with silver ribbon I had been saving for June weddings that might never come. The Langford Hotel wanted elegance. They wanted clean lines, soft color, nothing too wild, nothing too personal. People with money loved flowers that looked expensive without looking emotional. My mother used to say they wanted beauty without the burden of meaning. I worked fast because speed kept my hands from shaking. I filled 3 long black delivery boxes, lined them with tissue, tucked the roses in carefully, then added Italian ruscus along the edges until the arrangements looked like something that belonged under chandeliers instead of beside my cracked register. The shop phone rang twice while I worked. Once from a woman asking about sympathy lilies. Once from the landlord's office. I let the second call go to voicemail. Some voices could wait until I had enough courage to hear them. At 10:15, I locked the shop and loaded the boxes into the back of my mother's old Subaru. The car smelled faintly of soil, ribbon, and the vanilla air freshener she had hung from the mirror years ago. I drove north through Chelsea with the heater clicking, the eviction notice folded in my coat pocket, and the silver medal tucked under my sweater, warm from my skin. Traffic crawled along 9th Avenue. Taxi horns snapped in the cold air. Pedestrians crossed against lights with coffee cups and expensive coats, every one of them looking like they belonged somewhere important. I kept one hand on the wheel and the other near my throat, touching the metal through the fabric the way I always did when fear got too close. The Langford Hotel rose over the block like a building that had never been told no. Gray stone, brass doors, doormen in dark coats, flags moving gently above the entrance. I pulled into the loading area behind a catering van and sat there for 3 full breaths before turning off the engine. Inside, the service hallway was warm and bright, smelling of lemon polish, fresh linen, and food too delicate to ever be eaten standing up. A young event assistant with a headset waved me through, without really looking at my face. To her, I was the flower girl. The help. A pair of hands carrying beauty into a room that would forget who made it. I followed her into the ballroom, and for a moment I forgot to breathe. Crystal chandeliers floated above gold-trimmed ceilings. Round tables wore white cloths that fell perfectly to the floor. Champagne glasses stood in rows like little towers of light. Men in tailored suits spoke near the bar. Women in silk dresses laughed softly, their jewelry flashing whenever they lifted a hand. Everything gleamed. Everything whispered money. I looked down at my worn black flats and suddenly felt every scuff. Centerpieces along the auction tables, the assistant said, already checking her tablet. The Moretti party arrives at noon, and everything needs to be perfect. The name moved through me like cold water. Moretti. My hands tightened around the box so sharply the cardboard bent. For 15 years that name had lived in my memory like a locked room. My mother had never explained it. She only went quiet when she heard it on the news, turned off radios mid-sentence, and once moved us out of an apartment because a man with that last name owned the building. I told myself not to react. I told myself there were many Morettis in New York. Rich families. Old families. People who donated to hospitals and chaired auctions, and had their names carved into walls. But as I placed the first arrangement on the long auction table, I noticed the security. Not hotel security in loose jackets and bored expressions. These men stood too still. They watched exits, not guests. They spoke into tiny earpieces and touched nothing. One of them looked at me for half a second too long, and my skin prickled. I set down the last box near the stage and bent to lift a fallen rose from the floor. The metal slipped free from my sweater. It swung once in the ballroom light, silver catching gold. The tiny scratched surface bright against my gray knit sleeve. I grabbed it quickly and tucked it back, but not before I heard the room change behind me. The laughter softened. Footsteps slowed. Then someone near the entrance said, almost under his breath, "Mr. Moretti." I turned before I could stop myself. A man had entered the ballroom in a black suit, tall and composed, with dark hair brushed back and a face so controlled it seemed carved rather than born. The people around him shifted without being asked. He did not look at the chandeliers, the auction tables, or the guests waiting to impress him. His eyes found me. No, not me. The place where the metal had disappeared beneath my sweater. And in that single look, I knew I had not brought flowers into the Langford Hotel. I had brought my mother's secret straight into the hands of the one family she had spent her life running from. He crossed the ballroom without hurrying, and somehow that made every step worse. Men like him did not need to rush. The room made time for them. Conversations thinned into polite whispers. A waiter paused with a tray of champagne halfway between two guests. The woman with the headset looked at me as if I had spilled something expensive, even though the roses stood perfect and untouched behind me. I should have moved. I should have picked up the empty boxes, signed whatever delivery form they needed, and walked back through the service hallway before the past had a chance to learn my name. But my feet stayed locked to the marble floor. The man stopped 3 feet away, close enough for me to see the faint shadow beneath his eyes, the precise line of his black suit, the silver at his cuff, the calm that did not feel peaceful at all. He was maybe 35. White, Italian-American, with dark hair brushed back from a face too sharp for kindness and too controlled for surprise. But surprise was there. Not on his mouth. Not in his posture. In his eyes. Dark gray, almost storm-colored under the chandeliers. Fixed on the hollow of my throat where the metal had vanished. "Where did you get that?" he asked. His voice was low. "No griting. No epalegi." Just the question placed in the air like a key turning in a lock. My hand flew to my sweater. "I am sorry? The metal." He said it softly, but the word felt louder than the ballroom. "Where did you get it?" The assistant beside me opened her mouth, probably to explain that I was only the florist, that important men did not interrogate delivery girls between auction tables. But one glance from him closed it again. I felt heat crawl up my neck. "It is mine." That was not my question. I looked past him toward the service doors. They seemed farther away than before. His security stood near the entrance, not blocking me exactly, but making escape feel like a decision the entire room would witness. "I bought it," I said. The lie came out too quickly. "At a flea market in Brooklyn." His eyes sharpened. "No, you did not." My pulse kicked hard. "You do not know that. There is a scratch on the back, just above the saint's shoulder. Thin diagonal. Made by a pocket knife when someone tried to pry open the clasp." The ballroom disappeared for half a second. I was 12 again, standing in a narrow apartment kitchen while my mother held the metal under a yellow light, checking the damaged clasp with trembling fingers. "Do not take it off, Ava. Not for school. Not for sleep. Not for anyone." I forced my face still, but my body had already betrayed me. His gaze dropped to my hand gripping the chain through my sweater. "You know exactly what I am talking about. I know you are making a scene over a necklace that has nothing to do with you." His expression changed at the word necklace, so slight that anyone else might have missed it. I did not. It was not a necklace when I last saw it. My mouth went dry. The chandeliers above us blurred into gold circles. "I have work to finish." "Your work is finished. Then I will leave." I bent to grab the empty delivery boxes, needing something between us, something ordinary, something cardboard and real. My fingers fumbled with the handles. One of the roses shifted in its arrangement, and a single white petal fell onto the marble between his shoes and mine. He looked at it, then back at me. "What is your name?" "It is on the invoice." "I asked you." "Ava Bennett." He repeated it once under his breath, not like he was learning it, but like he was testing whether it fit inside an old memory. Bennett. My mother's stolen last name. The safe name. The name that had let us rent apartments, open a shop, disappear into busy streets. Hearing him say it made it feel paper thin. "And yours?" I asked, though I already knew. Everyone in the room knew. Still, I needed him to say it. I needed to hear the danger in full. Adrian Moretti. The name landed exactly where my mother had buried fear. I stepped back. Just one step, but he saw it. Of course he saw it. "You are afraid of that name," he said. "I am afraid of rich men who think every question deserves an answer." For the first time, something almost human touched his face. Not amusement. Not warmth. Recognition, maybe. Pain wearing a suit. That metal belonged to a boy who should have died in the rain 15 years ago. The air left my lungs. I could not stop it. His eyes held mine, and the ballroom around us went silent in my head. "So I will ask once more, Ava Bennett, where did you get it?" I did not answer. I ran. I ran through the service hallway with empty delivery boxes banging against my hip, and my heart beating so hard it felt like it was trying to escape before I did. Behind me, the ballroom swallowed its own silence, voices rising again in careful layers, the way wealthy rooms heal quickly from anything embarrassing. No one chased me. That should have made me feel safer. It did not. A man like Adrian Moretti did not need to run after anyone. He only needed to know where they were going. I pushed through a metal door marked staff only and nearly collided with a catering worker carrying trays of tiny desserts. She cursed under her breath. I apologized without slowing. The hallway smelled like butter, bleach, and panic. My flat slipped once on the polished floor, and I caught myself against the wall, the silver metal burning beneath my sweater as if it had become hot from being seen. By the time I reached the loading dock, my hands were shaking so badly I dropped my car keys. They hit the concrete with a small bright sound that made me think of the metal hitting the kitchen table 15 years ago, my mother's face pale above it, her voice low enough to scare me more than shouting ever could. If anyone asks, it came from a thrift store. If anyone says Moretti, you walk away. If anyone recognizes Deva, you run. So I ran. I drove back downtown with the delivery boxes sliding in the cargo space, and the city smeared by rain across the windshield. My phone buzzed twice. The Langford Hotel, probably asking why their florist had fled before signing the receipt. Then an unknown number. I turned the phone face down on the passenger seat and kept driving. Every red light felt too long. Every black car behind me became a warning. I told myself I was being dramatic. I told myself the past did not have hands. But when I pulled up outside Bennett Bloom's, there was a town car parked across the street, engine off, windows dark. I sat frozen behind the wheel. The shop looked smaller than it had that morning. The green awning sagged under the drizzle. The eviction notice was gone from the door because I had folded it into my pocket, but I could still see the shape of it there, like bad news leaves a shadow even after you remove the paper. I waited for the town car door to open. It did not. Finally, I forced myself out, locked the Subaru and hurried inside. The bell above the door rang too loudly. I locked the deadbolt behind me, then leaned against the glass until my breathing slowed. For the first time all day, the shop was quiet. Buckets of carnations lined the floor. A half-finished sympathy arrangement waited on the counter. Lavender breathed softly from the window display, sweet and useless against the fear in my throat. I pulled the metal out from under my sweater and turned it over. There it was, the scratch Adrian had described, thin and diagonal above the saint's shoulder. I had seen it 1,000 times. I had never known anyone else could name it like a scar. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I should have ignored it. Instead, I answered and said nothing. For a moment, there was only breath on the line. Then Adrian Moretti's voice came through, quiet enough to feel closer than it was. You left before I could pay you. My fingers tightened around the phone. Keep the money. I do not care about the flowers. Then care about this. Leave me alone. A pause. Not offended. Not surprised. Listening. You lied to me. You frightened me. Because of my name. I closed my eyes. My mother's voice echoed so clearly I almost turned to look for her. Never say it to strangers. Because men with names like yours always think fear is proof they deserve answers. He was silent long enough for me to hear rain tapping the shop window. Then he said, I am not asking because I want to hurt you. That is what powerful men say when they want you to stop resisting. His breath changed barely. Ava. Do not say my name like you know me. I know that metal. My throat tightened. Then forget it. I ended the call before he could answer and stood there shaking in the flower shop my mother had built from nothing. Across the street, the town car headlights turned on. Not moving. Just waking up. Somewhere far uptown, in a ballroom full of chandeliers and polished lies, Adrian Moretti had learned enough to start searching. And I had no idea how much of my life would survive once he found the truth. The headlights stayed on across the street for almost a full minute, two pale eyes watching Bennett Bloom's through the rain. I stood behind the locked door with one hand on the deadbolt and the other wrapped around the metal, telling myself not to move, not to breathe too loudly, not to let a parked car turn me back into the frightened 12-year-old my mother had dragged out of Brooklyn with one suitcase and a secret. Then the driver door opened. Not the back door. That detail mattered in a way I did not understand until later. Powerful men usually waited to be delivered. Adrian Moretti stepped out alone. No visible guards. No crowd of dark suits. Just him beneath a black umbrella, rain shining on his shoulders, his face unreadable under the weak glow of the street lamp. He crossed the street without rushing, the way he had crossed the ballroom, as if weather and traffic were things that understood his authority. I hated that my first feeling was not fear. It was relief, sharp and unwelcome, because the man who had haunted my mother's warnings looked less like a monster in the rain and more like a question I had spent my life refusing to answer. He stopped outside the door and looked at the glass, at the faded gold letters that spelled Bennett Blooms, at the taped outline where the notice had been that morning. Then his eyes lifted to mine. He did not knock. He waited. That almost made me open the door faster. Almost. I unlocked it because I wanted him gone, I told myself. Because ignoring him would only make him stay. Because the shop was mine for maybe one more night, and I would not be afraid inside my mother's walls. The bell rang when I opened the door. Adrian folded the umbrella and stepped inside, bringing the smell of rain, cold air, and expensive wool into the room full of lavender and cut stems. He looked around slowly, not with judgment, with attention. His gaze moved over the buckets on the floor, the crooked shelf behind the counter, the photograph of my mother tucked beside the register. I saw the moment he noticed her face. Something in him went still. "You knew my mother," I said. It was not a question. His eyes stayed on the photograph. My mother had been 30 in that picture, laughing with a bundle of sunflowers against her chest, her brown hair coming loose around her face. She looked alive enough to make grief feel fresh every time I saw it. "I knew of her," Adrian said carefully. "Her name was Clara." Hearing him say it felt like someone had opened a window in a locked room. "You do not get to say her name." His eyes came back to me. "Ava. No. You do not get to walk into my shop after cornering me at a hotel and talk about my mother like she was part of your family history." My voice rose, then broke, and I hated that too. "She spent 15 years terrified of your name." Adrian set the umbrella near the door. "That is why I came." "You came because of the medal." "Yes." "Then look at it." I pulled the chain from under my sweater and held the medal out in my palm. The silver caught the shop light, dull and scratched and ordinary to anyone who did not understand that ordinary things can carry unbearable weight. "This is what you wanted, right? A piece of metal. A memory. A reason to dig through a dead woman's life." His jaw tightened. "That medal was in my hand the night I should have disappeared into the river." The shop seemed to inhale around us. Rain tapped against the front window. Somewhere in the back room, the old refrigerator clicked on with a tired hum. "I was a child," he said. 16. There had been an accident near the pier. I remember cold water. Headlights. A girl telling me not to sleep. My fingers closed around the metal before I could stop them. His voice lowered. She held this against my palm and kept saying, "Stay with me." My chest hurt. Not from surprise. From recognition. Because the memory had lived inside me too, buried under my mother's fear, blurred by rain and sirens and the smell of the East River in winter. "That medal cost my mother everything," I whispered. Adrian did not move. "Tell me." I laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "So you can decide what to do with the truth? So I can understand why the woman who saved my life had to become a ghost." I wanted to hate him. I had prepared for hate. Hate was clean. Hate gave me something to hold. But the man standing in my flower shop looked at my mother's photograph like he was staring at a debt no money could pay. "She said your family was not safe," I told him. "She said someone inside the Moretti house wanted that night forgotten. She said if anyone knew I had been there, they would take everything from us." Adrian looked toward the folded notice on the counter. His expression changed, dark and quiet. "Someone still is. Someone still is." The words landed softly, but they seemed to move through every flower in the shop. The lavender in the window, the roses in their buckets, the sunflowers beneath my mother's photograph. Everything suddenly looked like evidence instead of memory. I stared at Adrian across the counter, trying to decide whether he had brought the danger with him or simply given it a name. "What do you mean?" I asked. He picked up the folded notice from the counter without asking, but he held it carefully, like even paper could bruise. His eyes moved over the amount, the penalties, the legal language dressed up as inevitability. "This debt does not look like a bank mistake." "It is not a mistake. It is my life." "No," he said. "This is pressure." I took the notice from his hand. "You do not know that." "I know pressure. I know when numbers are written to scare someone instead of collect from them." The refrigerator hummed in the back room. Rain slid down the front glass in long silver lines. Outside, New York kept breathing, taxis hissing through wet streets, people hurrying under umbrellas, Nobody knowing that inside a tiny flower shop, 15 years of silence had started coming apart. Adrian looked at my mother's photograph again. Tell me about that night. I almost said no. The word rose automatically, shaped by my mother's rules, by years of turning away from certain names, certain streets, certain memories. But the notice in my pocket was real. The metal in my palm was real. The man standing in my shop had recognized a scratch no stranger should have known. And some tired part of me understood that silence had not saved us. It had only delayed the bill. It was January, I said. My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to the girl I had been instead of the woman I had become. I was 12. My mother had taken a late cleaning job at a house near Brooklyn Heights. She told me to stay in the kitchen with my homework and not talk to anyone. Adrian's face stayed still, but his eyes changed. The Moretti house. I nodded. I did not know that then. I only knew everything in that house looked expensive and breakable. The floors shined. The lamps were gold. Even the silence felt rich. I looked down at the metal. I heard shouting later. Men arguing behind closed doors. My mother came in and told me we were leaving. She was scared. I had seen her tired, angry, sad, but never scared like that. Adrian's hands curled slowly at his sides. Then what happened? On the way out there was rain. Heavy rain. The kind that makes the streetlights look blurry. We were near the pier when I heard something by the water. At first I thought it was an animal. My throat tightened. I forced the next words out. It was you. Adrian did not blink. For all his power, for all the weight his name carried, he looked trapped by a memory he had never been able to finish. You were on the ground near the railing, I continued. Cold. Confused. Your shirt was torn at the shoulder. Not badly, but enough to scare me. You kept trying to close your eyes. My mother told me not to touch you. She said we had to go. But I could not leave you there. The shop blurred. I remembered the rain on my cheeks, the slick concrete under my knees, the way his hand had felt freezing when I put the metal in it because I had nothing else to give him. I kept telling you to stay with me. I said it over and over. You asked my name, but I was crying too hard to answer. Then headlights came around the corner, and my mother pulled me back. She said people were coming. She said if they saw us, we would never be safe again. Adrian's voice was barely above the rain. I woke up in a hospital with that sentence in my head. Stay with me. Yes. He looked at the metal. And no one believed there had been a girl. I gave a small broken laugh. My mother believed it. That was the problem. I walked behind the counter and opened the bottom drawer. The one that stuck unless you lifted it first. Beneath tissue paper and old ribbon rolls was a tin cookie box with faded blue flowers on the lid. I had not opened it in years. My hands knew the motion anyway. Inside were documents my mother had kept hidden. A photograph of her outside a brownstone, an old employee badge with the name Clara Bennett, a newspaper clipping about a Moretti family accident near the East River, and one envelope sealed with tape that had yellowed at the edges. Adrian stepped closer but stopped when I looked up, giving me the choice. That small restraint made my hands shake more than force would have. I opened the envelope. Inside was a note in my mother's handwriting. If they come for the shop, it means Richard found us. Do not trust the debt. Do not trust the papers. Tell the boy you saved that his uncle lied. I read the last sentence twice before I understood it. Adrian had gone completely still. Richard, he said. Not loudly. Not angrily. Just the name stripped down to something colder than rage. Who is Richard? I asked. Adrian's eyes lifted to mine, and for the first time, since he walked into my life, I saw not power, not suspicion, not command. I saw grief turning into certainty. My uncle, he said. And if your mother wrote this, then the debt on your shop was never about money. The room felt smaller after Adrian said his uncle's name. Richard. One word. And every unpaid bill on my counter seemed to rearrange itself into something deliberate. I had spent months blaming myself for the shop, for the missed payments, for not being smarter with money, for not saving enough when my mother was sick, for believing hard work could hold back a legal office with embossed letterhead. But Adrian looked at the notice like it was not proof of my failure. He looked at it like it was a weapon with fingerprints on it. You are wrong, I said, because some part of me still needed ordinary misery to be ordinary. This is debt. My mother took loans when she got sick. I signed payment extensions. I was late. That is all. Adrian took out his phone, but he did not turn away from me. Who holds the note? A company called North River Holdings. His eyes sharpened. Richard controls North River through 3 shell companies. The words were too clean, too fast, too impossible. How do you know that? Because he used it before. Rain tapped harder against the window. The old shop lights hummed above us. I looked down at my mother's note, at the line that made my stomach twist. If they come for the shop, it means Richard found us. Why would your uncle care about a flower shop? I asked. Adrian looked at the photograph of my mother again, and something cold settled into his face. Because your mother knew he was the reason I was at the river that night. My fingers went numb around the paper. He saw my expression and spoke carefully, choosing words that did not cut too deep. When I was 16, there was a family dispute. Richard wanted control of money that was supposed to go to my father's side. He arranged documents, lies, people in the right rooms. That night, I overheard enough to become inconvenient. You were a child. In families like mine, children become threats when they hear adult secrets. He said it without self-pity, and that made it worse. I sat down on the stool behind the counter before my legs gave me away. My mother had known. She had cleaned floors in a house full of polished lies and heard something that made her run with me in the rain. She had not been paranoid. She had been protecting the last witness no one believed existed. Me. Adrian made one call. Then another. His voice changed when he spoke to other people, still quiet but edged with command. He asked for property records, loan transfers, a copy of the foreclosure file, the original lien, and every signature attached to Bennett Blooms before noon. He never raised his voice. He never threatened. He simply spoke as if refusal was a language he did not recognize. I watched from behind the counter, anger rising with every efficient sentence. Not at him. Not exactly. At the ease of it. At how quickly doors opened when his name touched them. At how my mother had died exhausted in a back room while men like Richard hid behind paperwork and called it business. 30 minutes later, a black sedan stopped outside the shop. An older man in a charcoal coat stepped in carrying a leather folder. Adrian called him Thomas. Thomas called him Mr. Moretti. He handed over documents without looking at me until Adrian said, "She hears everything." That sentence moved through me quietly. She hears everything. Not she is fragile. Not she needs to leave the room. Not let the men handle it. Thomas placed the folder on the counter and opened it. Page after page appeared under the shop light. Transfers. Penalties. Interest added after my mother died. A signature that looked like hers but was not. Payment plan I had never seen. A clause that allowed North River Holdings to seize both the commercial space and the apartment above if I missed one accelerated deadline. This is not collections, Thomas said gently. This is constructed default. I stared at the fake signature until the ink blurred. They forged her name. Adrian's jaw tightened. Yes. My voice came out small. They waited until she was gone. Yes. There are moments when grief becomes something else. Not healing. Not peace. Something sharper. A kind of strength born from insult. I looked at my mother's photograph, at her laughing face, at the hands that had built every shelf in this room. Richard had not only come for the shop. He had come for the proof that she had ever fought back. What happens now? I asked. Adrian closed the folder. I end it. The words should have comforted me. Instead they made my chest tighten. End it how? He looked at me, and I saw the old darkness behind his restraint. The world he came from. The habits he had learned before mercy became possible. Quietly, he said. No, his eyes narrowed slightly. Ava. I stood. My hands were shaking but my voice was not. No quiet deals. No disappearing files. No backrooms. My mother lived in fear because powerful men decided the truth was easier to bury. I will not let you bury it again, even if you call it protection. Adrian said nothing. For the first time I had stopped him. Not with money. Not with influence. Just with the one thing my mother had left me besides the medal. A voice that had survived silence. Outside, another car pulled to the curb. Thomas looked through the rain-streaked window and went still. Adrian turned slowly. Across the street, beneath a black umbrella, an older man in a perfect gray suit stepped onto the sidewalk and looked directly at my shop. Adrian's face became unreadable. "Richard," he said. And I understood then that the man who had tried to erase my mother had finally come to see what was left of her. Richard Moretti did not hurry across the street. He moved through the rain with the calm of a man who had spent his life letting other people open doors before he reached them. Two younger men walked behind him, both in dark coats, both carrying the same blank expression I had seen at the Langford Hotel, the face people wear when they are paid not to ask themselves questions. The bell above Bennett Bloom's rang when Richard entered, and for one strange second, the sound felt offensive, too cheerful for the kind of man stepping into my mother's shop. He closed his umbrella, looked at the buckets of flowers, the old counter, the crooked shelf, then finally at me. His eyes were pale blue, polished and empty. "Clara's daughter," he said. "Not Ava. Not Miss Bennett. Clara's daughter." As if I was not a person, only something unfinished that belonged to a dead woman's file. Adrian moved one step forward. Richard smiled at him. "Nephew." The word carried warmth the way plastic fruit carries sweetness. "I was told you had taken an interest in a small property dispute. I did not expect sentiment." Adrian's voice stayed even. "You should have expected memory." Richard glanced at the metal in my hand. For the first time his smile thinned. "Ah, that old thing." My fingers closed around it. "You know what it is. I know your mother had a talent for making ordinary objects feel important." My anger came so fast it steadied me. "Do not talk about her like that." Richard looked amused, which told me more about him than fear would have. He was not used to being corrected by women behind flower shop counters. "Your mother was paid well for her work. She chose to run. She chose instability. Whatever debts followed her are unfortunate, but hardly my responsibility." Thomas opened the leather folder on the counter and turned one document toward him. This signature was forged. Richard did not look down. "Careful, counselor. These penalties were manufactured." Careful again. Adrian was very still beside me. I could feel the old version of him in that stillness, the man who could solve things in shadows, the man Richard probably understood better than I ever would. For a moment I was afraid Adrian would choose that language because it was easier, because men like Richard had built a world where truth needed permission and silence moved faster. So I stepped in front of the counter and placed my mother's note on top of the folder. My hands shook, but I let them. "She knew you would come one day," I said. Richard's eyes dropped to the handwriting. Something flickered across his face and vanished. "A grieving woman writes many things. A frightened woman hides evidence," I said. "A guilty man calls it grief." The shop went silent except for the rain. Adrian turned his head slightly toward me, and I felt him listening, really listening, the way he had in the ballroom, only now there was no suspicion in. Only respect. Richard looked at him. "You are going to let her speak to me like this?" Adrian did not move. "I am interested in hearing what she says next." That sentence changed the room. Not loudly, not dramatically, but I felt the floor return beneath my feet. I lifted my chin. I do not want a quiet deal. I do not want a check slid across this counter so everyone can pretend my mother was confused, or poor, or careless. I want the forged papers reported. I want the property records corrected. I want North River Holdings named. I want every document you used against my mother brought into daylight. Richard's smile disappeared completely. "You have no idea what you are asking for." "Yes, I do." My voice cracked, but it did not break. "I am asking for the truth." He looked at Adrian then, no longer pretending this was about me. "You expose family business for a florist?" Adrian looked at the photograph of my mother, then at the medal in my palm, then back to his uncle. "She saved my life when I had nothing to give her. Her mother protected the truth when my own blood buried it. So yes, Richard. For a florist." The older man's face hardened. "You will regret this." "No," Adrian said softly. "I regret waiting 15 years. Thomas picked up his phone and stepped toward the window. "Detective Morales is on the line. The district attorney's office has the documents." Richard turned toward him sharply, but Adrian's voice stopped him without raising above a murmur. "Do not make another mistake in her shop." "My shop." The word settled over me like a hand on my back, Not pushing, just reminding me I was still standing. Richard looked around one last time, at the flowers, the folder, the woman he had tried to erase through paper and fear. Then he walked out into the rain with less power than he had brought in. I watched the black umbrella disappear into the gray street. Only then did I realize I had been holding my breath. Adrian stood beside me, close but not touching. "I could have ended it quietly," he said. I looked at him. "I know." His eyes met mine, dark and steady. "You were right not to let me." Outside, sirens sounded far away, not frantic, just inevitable. Inside Bennett Bloom's, my mother's photograph watched over white roses, wet glass, and the first honest silence I had ever heard. By dawn, the rain had stopped, and New York looked rinsed clean in the weak gold light that slipped between the buildings. Bennett Bloom's should have been closed. The notice should have been on the door. The lock should have been changed by men who did not know my mother's name. Instead, I stood on the sidewalk with her old key in my hand while a city inspector removed the final strip of legal tape from the glass. Thomas stood near the curb with a folder under one arm, speaking quietly to a woman from the district attorney's office. 2 officers were across the street, not rushing, not dramatic, just doing the kind of work that should have been done years ago. North River Holdings had been frozen pending investigation. The forged signatures had been entered into evidence. The foreclosure had been suspended, then withdrawn. Those words should have felt too official to touch, but they were real. I had heard them from people who did not lower their voices when they said my mother's name. Clara Bennett. Not unstable. Not confused. Not careless. Brave. I unlocked the shop door at 7:12 in the morning, the same way my mother used to, turning the key gently because the old lock always stuck if you forced it. The bell rang above me, bright and familiar, and this time it did not sound like warning. It sounded like welcome. Inside, the flowers had survived the night better than I had. The white roses stood open now, soft and full, their petals catching morning light. Lavender still breathed in the window. The photograph of my mother watched from beside the register, her smile unchanged, but somehow the room around it felt different. Less haunted. More awake. Adrian Moretti stood outside under the faded green awning, not entering until I looked back. That mattered. Everything about him had begun to matter in quiet ways I did not know how to name. He wore the same black coat from the night before, his dark hair touched by wind, his face tired in the honest way people look after truth has cost them something. "You can come in," I said. He stepped inside slowly, as if crossing the threshold of a chapel. For a man who could command rooms full of powerful people, he looked almost careful among the buckets and ribbon rolls. "It is yours," he said. "It was always yours." I looked at the counter, at the old register, at the back room curtain where my mother used to disappear with invoices and peppermint tea. For a while I was not sure anything was. He did not answer quickly. I had learned that about him. Adrian did not rush words when they mattered. "Richard is being questioned," he said. "Others will follow." "And your family?" Something passed across his face, shadow and steel. "We'll learn that loyalty without truth is only fear wearing a better suit." I touched the metal at my throat. For 15 years it had been a warning, a rule, a piece of silver carrying my mother's terror. Now it felt different. Not lighter exactly, but shared. "She told me never to say your name," I said. Adrian looked at my mother's photograph. "She was right to protect you. She also wanted the truth found." "Yes." His voice softened. "And she raised the woman who found it." I looked away because kindness from him still startled me more than danger. On the counter lay one white rose I had trimmed before sunrise. I picked it up and held it out to him. The gesture felt small after everything, but maybe small things were all the truth ever needed to begin again. Adrian took it carefully, his fingers brushing only the stem, never reaching for more than I offered. "You saved the boy I was," he said. "Let me stand beside the woman you became." My throat tightened. The old version of me would have heard ownership in that sentence. The frightened girl from Brooklyn would have run before the echo finished. But I was not only that girl anymore. I was my mother's daughter. I was the woman who had stood in front of Richard Moretti and asked for the truth in daylight. So I looked at Adrian and said, "Beside me, not in front of me." For the first time his smile reached his eyes. "Beside you." Outside, the city was waking. A delivery truck rolled past. Someone laughed at the corner coffee cart. The world did not stop to honor what had changed, but the shop knew. The flowers knew. The floorboards, the bell, the photograph, the scratched silver metal against my skin, all of it knew. My mother had spent years running from men who believed power meant burying what hurt them. Adrian had inherited that darkness, but he had chosen to open a door instead of close one. He could command fear from an entire city, but standing there in my flower shop with a white rose in his hand, he looked like a man learning that truth was the only power worth kneeling for.